Some secrets fester deep, buried beneath layers of time and the black, still waters of the swamp. But mine clawed their way towards the light, demanding voice after decades of suffocating silence. My name is Cordelia Beauchamp, 83 years circling this sun, and the weathered cypress cabin I still inhabit on the fringe of the Okefenokee swamp holds more ghosts than most folks in southern Georgia could ever imagine. They see the grandmother now, fussing over pie crusts for the Sunday market, offering gentle smiles. They don't perceive the young girl who learned too early that monsters don't always possess claws or fangs. Sometimes they share your blood, your home, your last name, and shatter your world from the inside out. Sharing this narrative now stirs the sediment of memory, bringing painful truths to the surface. Before I delve deeper into that shadowed past, I ask for your quiet company in the comments. Perhaps let me know where my words are reaching you across the globe. Your presence, your acknowledgement, lends strength after so many years lived within walls of silence. Please consider liking this testimony too. It helps remind me I'm no longer carrying this immense burden entirely alone. Your listening ear means more than words can convey. My story began in 1942, born into a corner of Charlton County, even more profoundly isolated than it appears today. Our family scratched a living from the land, from the bounty and inherent dangers of the swamp itself. My father, Elijah, ran a humble bait and tackle shop, a precarious business catering mostly to the handful of intrepid tourists who dared venture into the labyrinthine waterways, seeking fish or fleeting glimpses of alligators. The swamp provides, Cordelia, Daddy would often declare, his voice filled with a rough affection before the war irrevocably altered the landscape of his soul. And it did provide, fish teeming in the dark channels, game birds and deer moving silently through the dense woods, vegetables coaxed from the small, humid patch of earth behind our cabin. We weren't affluent, far from it, but we possessed sufficiency. Mama Rose, her hands deft and calloused, wove exquisite baskets from sweet grass gathered along the marsh edges, intricate patterns that fetched a modest price at the general store in Folkestone, some 20 arduous miles away. Ours was a simple existence, circumscribed by the rhythms of the swamp, yet imbued with a quiet contentment, until the draft notice arrived in 1943, pulling Daddy away towards the distant, unimaginable horrors of the Pacific Theater. When Elijah Bosch returned 2 years later, in 45, he was a hollowed-out replica of the man who had departed. The war hadn't just scarred him, it had fundamentally rewired him, extinguishing the warmth that once resided in his eyes, replacing it with something murky, distant, impenetrable as the swamp's deepest pools. He brought back invisible ghosts, spectral companions from jungle warfare that tormented his waking hours and stalked his sleep. Initially, he sought solace, or perhaps oblivion, in the raw moonshine procured from Old Man Jenkins, whose illicit still bubbled away in a hidden cypress grove, a place even the county sheriff avoided. The drinking began sporadically, confined mostly to Saturday nights, when the nightmares seemed most relentless. Gradually, it encroached upon Fridays as well. Soon, the mason jar filled with clear, potent liquor became his constant, necessary companion. The sharp, acrid stench of cheap alcohol became his herald, announcing his volatile presence before his heavy, unsteady boots even hit the porch steps. Our small cabin, constructed by my grandfather's own hands from resilient cypress wood, had always felt like my sanctuary. Elevated on sturdy stilts to evade the swamp's inevitable floodwaters, its wide, screened porch served as the stage for countless peaceful evenings, Mama and I shelling peas, the rhythmic pop of the pods mingling with the calls of unseen birds, watching the elegant herons fish silently in the fading twilight. But following Daddy's return, that cherished refuge transformed into my prison. "Get yourself hidden now, Cordelia," Mama would whisper urgently, her eyes wide with apprehension, the moment we detected the distinctive sputter of his John boat engine approaching through the dense cattails and sawgrass. "Go on now, baby girl. Make yourself small and unseen." I learned to move with practiced silence, scurrying towards my secret refuge, a shallow, hollow space beneath the cabin's wooden floorboards, accessed only by dislodging a specific loose plank concealed beneath my narrow bed. It offered barely enough room for my small 8-year-old frame, forcing me to curl tightly, knees drawn defensively to my chest, like a threatened pill bug. From that cramped, earthy-smelling darkness, I became an unwilling audience to the unfolding domestic terror above. The heavy thud of his muddy boots ascending the porch steps, the violent slam of the cabin door against the interior wall. And then, his voice, thick with liquor, laced with menace. "Where in hell is my supper, woman? This place is a pigsty." It never mattered how immaculately Mama maintained our modest home, nor how perfectly timed his evening meal awaited him. Nothing was ever sufficient to appease the demons that rode him. The first time his hand struck her, the sound registered before the meaning. A sharp, cracking noise, like a dry twig snapping underfoot, immediately followed by Mama's stifled cry of pain. "Please, Elijah," she'd plead, her voice trembling. "Not so loud. Cordelia. She'll hear you." But her pleas invariably acted as fuel, igniting his rage further. "Let her damn well hear," he'd roar, his voice echoing terrifyingly in the small space. "Let the whole cursed swamp hear. This is my house, and both of you useless females will learn some proper respect." Some nights inflicted deeper wounds than others. A poor day's fishing, a tourist complaining about the lack of alligator sightings, the boat engine sputtering unexpectedly. Any minor frustration, magnified through the distorting lens of alcohol, could detonate into explosive violence directed towards us. Mama bore the brunt of it, consistently, instinctively positioning herself as a shield between his fury and my bedroom door, absorbing the blows meant, perhaps, for both of us. Yet, some nights, her selfless sacrifice proved insufficient. I'd hear his enraged demands echoing through the thin walls. "Where is she? Where's that worthless girl hiding herself now?" The visceral terror of those moments remains palpable, even after all these decades. The frantic acceleration of my heartbeat against my ribs, the shallow, ragged breaths drawn in the dusty confinement, the desperate, silent prayer that the floorboard directly above my hiding place wouldn't betray my location with an ill-timed creak. Our nearest neighbors, the Wilkes family, resided a full 2 miles away via the winding water channels, too distant to possibly hear our muffled screams. Besides, the swamp fostered a fierce, unspoken code of non-interference. What transpired within the confines of a man's home, behind his closed door, was considered his private domain, strictly his own business. Mama adopted the habit of wearing long-sleeved blouses year-round, even during the suffocating humidity of Georgia's summers. She'd offer weak, forced smiles in response to the concerned, questioning glances from Mrs. Jenkins at the general store, fabricating explanations for the darkening bruise on her cheek, a clumsy stumble off the dock, an unfortunate encounter with a low-hanging branch while gathering firewood. I, too, became adept at deception from a young age, solemnly informing my concerned schoolteacher that the split lip resulted from accidentally running into a door. The absolute nadir arrived during a ferocious thunderstorm in the summer of 1952. I was 10 years old. Rain had lashed down relentlessly for days, inundating sections of the swamp typically untouched by floodwaters. The deluge marooned Daddy, preventing him from taking his boat out, precluding him from opening the bait shop, trapping him within the increasingly claustrophobic confines of our small cabin. He'd begun drinking early that morning, his agitation escalating visibly with each passing hour, pacing the floorboards like a caged, tormented panther. By late afternoon, when his supply of moonshine ran dry, his simmering rage reached its terrifying apex. Hidden beneath the floorboards, my usual refuge, I heard Mama scream, not her customary stifled cry of pain, but a raw, primal sound of pure, unadulterated terror that instantly froze the blood in my veins. The scream was followed by a violent crash, the distinct sound of shattering glass, and then a heavy, sickening thud that caused the floorboards directly above me to vibrate ominously. I don't know what propelled me from my hiding place that night. Perhaps the abrupt, terrifying cessation of Mama's sobbing. Perhaps some primal protective instinct warning, that inaction courted irreversible tragedy. Pushing upwards on the loose plank, I emerged into the lamplit chaos of the kitchen to confront a scene ripped from my worst nightmares. Daddy stood swaying slightly over Mama's still, crumpled form on the floor. A jaggedly broken whiskey bottle remained clutched in his hand, its sharp edges dripping. Dark blood mingled with spilled alcohol, pooling on the rough wooden floorboards. "You killed her," I whispered, the words feeling alien, distant, uttered by someone else. "You finally went and killed her." He turned towards me slowly, his eyes struggling to focus, a flicker of confusion briefly clouding his features before recognition dawned. And in that fleeting moment of lucidity, something shifted within his gaze, shock, perhaps, or the first discernible glimmer of remorse I had ever witnessed there. But remorse arrived far too late. What I couldn't comprehend then, in my terrified 10-year-old mind, was that this horrific night, while marking the beginning of the end of one particular nightmare, simultaneously opened the door onto a path towards freedom, far longer, more arduous, and infinitely more painful than I could have possibly conceived. Mama didn't perish that night, though a vital part of her spirit seemed to extinguish, leaving behind a fragile, hollowed shell. I managed, somehow, fueled by adrenaline and terror, to navigate our spare John boat through the churning, rain-swollen waterways to the Wilkes place, my desperate cries finally rousing them. Old Dr. Harrison made the arduous journey out from town later that night. He meticulously stitched the deep gash on Mama's scalp and carefully set her fractured arm, his lips compressed into a thin, disapproving line throughout the procedure. Yet, like nearly everyone else in isolated Charlton County, he adhered to the unspoken code, asking no probing questions. "She fell," Daddy explained, remarkably sober now, weaving a plausible narrative with practiced ease. "Rose has always been unsteady on these wet porch boards, told her repeatedly to exercise caution during the storm." Dr. Harrison's gaze flickered briefly towards me, huddled silently in the corner, arms wrapped tightly around my own thin frame, before returning to my father. "Ensure she rests properly, Elijah," he advised gruffly. "Head injuries can manifest complications." That was the extent of his intervention, before packing his worn black bag and departing, leaving us once again alone in the oppressive silence, prisoners within our own home. That incident, however, precipitated a subtle shift, though not towards the safety I craved. Daddy became more cautious afterwards, not kinder, but more calculated in his cruelty. He learned to inflict injuries where clothing would reliably conceal them, bruises on her back, her ribs, places hidden beneath the high collars and long sleeves she perpetually wore. He ensured neighbors remained unaware of the true extent of the violence. And, most insidiously, he discovered that threatening Mama served as the most effective means of controlling me. "One word out of you to anyone, Cordelia," he'd hiss, his fingers digging painfully into my shoulder, leaving deep bruises that mirrored Mama's hidden marks. "And your precious Mama will bear the consequences. Do you understand me clearly, girl?" I understood with chilling clarity. By the time I turned 16, in 1958, I had mastered the art of maintaining our family's carefully constructed facade of normalcy. At school, I remained quiet, studious, polite. I earned respectable grades, sang dutifully in the choir at the small Baptist church we attended faithfully every Sunday, Daddy in his stiffly pressed shirt, Mama and I perpetually clad in modest dresses with high necklines and long sleeves, regardless of the suffocating Georgia heat. To outsiders, we presented the picture of a hard-working, devout swamp family, modest, respectable, salt of the earth, as I once overheard Mrs. Calloway remark approvingly to another woman during a church potluck supper. "Elijah fought bravely for our country, bless his heart, and just observe how devoted he remains to Rose and their sweet daughter." A silent scream of protest, of truth, clawed at my throat. Instead, I offered them both a polite, practiced smile and extended a slice of Mama's renowned sweet potato pie. The tumultuous 1960s brought whispers of profound change from the world beyond our insular swamp. Electricity finally reached our remote cabin, and the ancient Philco radio Daddy had salvaged and painstakingly repaired became our primary conduit to that wider reality. News reports crackled with accounts of civil rights marches, escalating conflict in distant Vietnam, bewildering stories of women burning their brassieres in protest. It all felt like dispatches from an alien planet, utterly disconnected from the stagnant, fear-laden reality of our daily existence. Within the confines of our cabin walls, nothing changed. If anything, Daddy grew more embittered, more resentful, as the years slipped by. The sporadic trickle of tourists seeking his fishing expertise dwindled further, replaced by newcomers interested in faster modern airboat tours of the swamp offered by enterprising outsiders. The world was accelerating, leaving him behind, marooned in his own bitterness, a feeling he relentlessly attempted to drown in ever-increasing quantities of cheap liquor. By 1965, I was 23 years old, an anomaly in our community where most young women my age had long since married or sought employment opportunities in nearby cities like Savannah or Jacksonville. But I remained trapped, anchored to our decaying cabin by invisible chains forged from love for Mama and paralyzing fear of the repercussions should I dare to leave her alone with him. "You ought to go, Cordelia," she whispered one humid evening as we sat together on the back porch, shelling black-eyed peas, Daddy having finally succumbed to a drunken stupor inside. The years had etched deep lines onto her once beautiful face. At 45, she looked decades older, her dark hair heavily streaked with premature gray, her posture permanently stooped, like a plant perpetually bent by harsh winds. "Ain't nothing left for you here, 'cept sorrow and heartache. I won't leave you alone with him, Mama," I replied softly, the familiar refrain tasting like ash in my mouth. She reached across the space between our rocking chairs, taking my hand, her own fingers calloused, joints swollen and bent from years of abuse and hard labor. "I made my choice years ago when I married him, child. But you—" What she couldn't grasp, perhaps, was that I had long ago resigned myself to the belief that a proper life, beyond the confines of the swamp, beyond his suffocating control, was simply unattainable for me. Life settled back into its grim, unchanging routine following that incident. I assumed primary responsibility for running the dilapidated bait shop, while Daddy dedicated himself more fully to drinking. Occasionally, he'd vanish for days at a time, disappearing into the deeper recesses of the swamp, presumably seeking refuge at Jenkins' Still. Those brief respites felt like surfacing for precious gulps of air after being held forcibly underwater. During his absences, Mama and I would sit together quietly on the porch, sometimes talking softly, other times simply listening companionably to the familiar crepuscular chorus of frogs and insects that signaled the swamp's nocturnal awakening. In the summer of 1968, an unexpected development occurred. The Carpenter family acquired Old Man Jenkins' property after his passing. They were outsiders, recent transplants from Maryland, drawn south by Mr. Carpenter's idealistic notion of establishing an ecotourism venture focused on the unique Okefenokee ecosystem. Their daughter, Sharon, roughly my age, accompanied them, seemingly reluctantly from my initial observations. Starved for companionship amongst peers in this unfamiliar, isolated territory, Sharon sought me out almost immediately. She'd frequently appear at the bait shop, brimming with questions about the swamp's flora and fauna, local customs, my circumscribed life. She possessed a confidence, an outspokenness utterly foreign to my experience, habitually wearing practical trousers instead of dresses, openly discussing topics like women's liberation movements happening far beyond our swamp borders. "Don't you ever yearn for more than just this?" she inquired pointedly one afternoon, gesturing expansively towards the surrounding wetlands as we sat together on the shop's weathered dock, our bare feet dangling just above the dark, tannin-stained water. "This is all I've ever known, Sharon," I responded truthfully, though the words felt inadequate, tasted bitter on my tongue. "That wasn't my question," she countered gently but persistently, her direct gaze seeming to penetrate the carefully constructed walls shielding my inner self. Before I could formulate a response, the distinctive chug of Daddy's boat engine sounded around the nearby bend in the channel. One glance at his erratic handling of the tiller confirmed he was already significantly intoxicated, despite it being barely past noon. "You should probably head back now," I advised Sharon quickly, rising abruptly to my feet. She frowned slightly at my sudden dismissal, but gathered her belongings without argument. As she turned to leave, she paused. "We're planning a small cookout at our place on Saturday evening. You and your parents would be most welcome to join us." I nodded noncommittally, already certain we wouldn't attend. As predicted, Daddy scoffed derisively at the invitation when I reluctantly mentioned it later that evening. "Fancy city folk," he spat contemptuously. "Think they can just waltz down here and impose their ways on us. Mark my words, they won't last a single harsh winter in this swamp." But Sharon Carpenter, inadvertently, had already changed something significant. She had planted a dangerous, persistent seed within my mind, the radical possibility of questioning, of desiring, of perhaps someday finding the courage necessary to shatter the suffocating cycle of silence and fear that had defined our existence for far too long. I had never intentionally struck another living being. Witnessing relentless violence throughout my formative years had instilled in me a profound abhorrence for physical aggression. Yet, there I stood in our small, chaotic kitchen, the heavy cast-iron skillet, Mama's favorite for frying catfish, clutched tightly in my trembling hands, its weight a surprising counterpoint to the adrenaline surging through me. I watched, almost detached, as Daddy's grip finally loosened around Mama's throat, his attention swiveling towards me, bloodshot eyes clouded with disbelief. "What in the hell do you think you're doing, girl?" he growled, his focus shifting entirely from his primary victim to this unexpected challenge. Mama slid weakly down the cabinet face, collapsing onto the floor amidst the broken glass, gasping raggedly for air, her fingers instinctively probing the angry red marks blooming on her neck. The skillet felt impossibly heavy, an alien extension of my arm. "Let her go," I commanded, my voice emerging as barely more than a whisper, yet imbued with a steadiness that surprised me. "Don't you ever touch her again." He actually laughed then, a harsh, grating sound utterly devoid of amusement. "Or what?" he sneered, taking a menacing step towards me, the shards of glass crunching loudly beneath his heavy work boots. "Gonna strike your own daddy, after everything I've provided for you?" He advanced another step. "Put that skillet down now, for you hurt yourself accidentally." I remained rooted to the spot. 27 years of accumulated fear, subservience, and suppressed rage had somehow coalesced, hardened into something new. A cold, unyielding resolve. Sharon Carpenter's words echoed, "Don't you ever want more?" Images flashed, the courageous women I'd read about in those rare, smuggled magazines, marching for their rights in distant cities. If they could find the bravery to challenge societal norms on public streets, surely I could summon the strength to stand my ground within the confines of my own kitchen. "I mean it," I repeated, my voice gaining volume, resonance. "This cycle of abuse ends tonight." "Dachino." His face contorted, darkening, that familiar storm of uncontrolled rage gathering rapidly. "You ungrateful little." He lunged forward suddenly, but years of heavy drinking had dulled his reflexes, slowed his movements. I sidestepped instinctively, keeping the heavy iron pan defensively between us. "Cordelia, no." Mama pleaded desperately from the floor, her voice raspy with fear. "He'll kill you for sure." Perhaps she was right. Defying him so directly might indeed seal my fate. But in that charged moment, a stark realization struck me. I had been slowly dying for years anyway, piece by piece, my spirit eroding with every blow he landed, every terrified scream swallowed, every morning spent pretending normalcy. "Go on then," I taunted, astonished by my own sudden boldness, fueled by years of repressed anger. "Show me what a powerful man you truly are, beating on women who can't defend themselves. What would those war buddies you brag about think of Elijah Beauchamp now?" Invoking his full name, challenging his carefully constructed self-image, proved the necessary catalyst. He charged at me with an inarticulate roar of pure fury, and this time, primal instinct, honed by years of observing his attacks, took complete control. I swung the heavy skillet with every ounce of strength I possessed, the dense iron connecting solidly with the side of his head. A sickening, dull thud echoed in the small kitchen. He staggered backward, confusion momentarily replacing the rage in his eyes as his knees buckled beneath him. He collapsed heavily onto the kitchen floor, landing amidst the shattered glass and spilled preserves, blood beginning to seep from a deep gash on his temple. The ensuing silence felt absolute, deafening. The cast-iron skillet slipped from my suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering loudly onto the floor beside him. I stood frozen, staring down at my father's prone, unconscious form, momentarily convinced I had killed him. Only the faint, shallow rise and fall of his chest offered reassurance otherwise, though the knowledge brought scant relief. "Mama," I whispered, dropping to my knees beside her trembling form. "Are you all right? Can you stand?" She nodded weakly, her terrified gaze fixed on Daddy's still figure. "Oh, Cordelia," she breathed, her voice choked with fear. "What have you done?" "He's not going to hurt us anymore," I told her firmly, helping her carefully to her feet. "We're leaving, Mama. Right now." Her eyes widened further in panic. "Leaving? But where could we possibly go? And I should have broken us free years ago." Moving with newfound urgency, I guided her towards her small bedroom, instructing her to pack only essential items we could carry easily. I did likewise, hastily stuffing a small canvas bag with a change of clothes, the meager roll of bills, $43, I'd painstakingly saved in secret over years, and the faded, precious photograph of my maternal grandparents, my sole tangible link to family beyond my parents. Mama moved mechanically, like an automaton, years of ingrained obedience rendering her incapable of refusing a direct command, even from her daughter. Yet, her hands shook violently as she folded a worn cotton nightgown into her small bag. "He'll come after us," she whispered fearfully, glancing nervously towards the kitchen. "He always swore nobody ever leaves him." "We'll go somewhere he won't anticipate," I assured her, though no concrete plan had yet formed in my racing mind. Our familial connections were virtually non-existent. Mama's relatives resided in distant South Alabama, relations severed long before my birth. My father had systematically isolated us over the years, ensuring no potential support network existed. Except the Carpenters, I suddenly realized aloud. Sharon mentioned they came down from Maryland. Her father runs that new tour business. They possess a truck. Perhaps they could assist us in reaching the bus station in Waycross. Mama looked profoundly uncertain, but any potential objection died on her lips as a low groan emanated from the kitchen. Daddy was regaining consciousness. "Now, Mama," I urged, grabbing both our meager bags and her trembling hand. "We must leave immediately." We slipped silently out the back door, melting into the humid embrace of the September night. The full moon hung high, casting an ethereal, silvery light across the familiar boardwalk that snaked from our cabin down to the water's edge, where our small fleet of boats, Daddy's larger fishing vessel and the smaller, older John boat, were moored. Opting for the John boat, quieter, less likely to alert Daddy should he fully awaken, I carefully helped Mama aboard, untied the worn mooring rope, and used the long pole to push us away from the dock, guiding us into the dark, sluggish channel that led towards the Carpenter's property. The swamp at night possessed a unique, mysterious ambience, teeming with sounds that would likely terrify unaccustomed ears. But for me, the deep, resonant chorus of bullfrogs, the occasional startling splash of a large fish or submerged alligator, the soft sighing whisper of the night breeze rustling through the ancient cypress trees. This was the familiar, intrinsic soundtrack of my home. Spanish moss, draped heavy in silver from the overhanging branches in the moonlight, formed ghostly, shifting archways above us as we glided silently through the black water. Mama sat rigidly still in the bow, her face a pale, indistinct oval in the darkness. I couldn't discern if she wept. She had mastered the art of silent tears years ago. The stark realization sent a fresh surge of protective anger coursing through me, solidifying my resolve. The journey took nearly an hour, navigating the intricate network of familiar waterways by moonlight and instinct. Finally, the Carpenter's dock emerged from the darkness ahead. Their cabin appeared larger, more substantial than ours, recently renovated, boasting modern amenities like a screened porch and rooftop solar panels. Features that had undoubtedly fueled local gossip among the scattered swamp families. A single light glowed warmly from within. As I carefully secured our small boat, the screen door creaked open. "Hello," Sharon's voice called out hesitantly into the night. "Is someone out there?" "It's Cordelia Beauchamp," I answered, my voice steadier now, helping Mama carefully onto the sturdy dock planks. "And my mother. We require assistance." Sharon emerged onto the dock, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. It swept across my face first, then moved towards my mother, lingering pointedly on the livid, finger-shaped bruises darkening around her throat. Sharon's expression instantly transformed from cautious curiosity to deep concern. "Come inside," she stated simply, her voice firm, turning to lead us towards the welcome light of the cabin. What transpired next unfolded in a blur of compassionate efficiency that felt almost dreamlike after the years of neglect and isolation. Mr. Carpenter, a tall, gentle man with kind, intelligent eyes magnified behind wire-rimmed spectacles, immediately began making calls on their telephone, a modern marvel we lacked. Mrs. Carpenter, warm and matronly, gently tended to Mama's injuries, cleaning the gash on her head, applying soothing salve to the bruises on her neck, with a tenderness that brought unexpected tears, stinging to my own eyes. Sharon sat beside me at their brightly lit kitchen table, pressing a mug of steaming hot tea into my hands, though my internal tremor made it impossible to drink. "You did the right thing, Cordelia," she repeated softly, reassuringly. "You're both safe here now." But a deeper, colder knowledge resided within me. As long as we remained within the geographical confines of Charlton County, as long as Daddy lived and possessed the means to track us, genuine safety remained an elusive, perhaps unattainable, concept. Mr. Carpenter confirmed my unspoken fears upon returning to the kitchen, his expression grave. "I spoke directly with Sheriff Daniels," he reported grimly. "He stated that, without independent witnesses, it essentially becomes your father's word against yours regarding the events of tonight. And," he added significantly, "Elijah Beauchamp apparently maintains influential connections within the local department. He attempted to kill my mother." I protested, my voice rising with indignation. "The physical evidence is clearly visible on her neck. Accidents frequently occur, especially in households where alcohol is present," Mr. Carpenter reiterated gently, likely echoing the sheriff's anticipated dismissal, the probable official narrative. "I am truly sorry, Miss Beauchamp, but the sheriff explicitly indicated he is not inclined to formally pursue charges based solely on your account." The blatant injustice of it burned like swallowed acid in my throat. This was 1969. The world outside the swamp was supposedly undergoing profound transformation. Men had walked on the moon just months earlier. Women across the nation were vociferously demanding equality. Yet, here, in this forgotten, stagnant corner of rural Georgia, time seemed stubbornly arrested. A man could still brutalize his family with virtual impunity, shielded by antiquated codes of silence and local cronyism. "Then we must leave," I stated firmly, "the decision absolute. Tonight. As far from here as possible." Mrs. Carpenter exchanged a significant look with her husband. "But where will you possibly go?" I hesitated, the stark reality of our predicament crashing down. Mama and I possessed virtually no experience of the world beyond the swamp's edge. Jacksonville, Florida, represented the farthest extent of our previous travels. We lacked marketable skills for city employment, possessed minimal education beyond basic high school, and had no established connections outside our isolated community. I have a sister residing in Baltimore," Sharon interjected suddenly. "She works administration at a women's shelter there. I'm certain she could assist you in getting established, finding employment, securing safe housing." "Baltimore?" Mama whispered, the name sounding as remote and alien as Timbuktu might have. "That's incredibly far away." "That's precisely the point, Mama," I told her gently, squeezing her trembling hand. "He won't pursue us that far." Mr. Carpenter cleared his throat. As it happens, I'm scheduled to drive into Savannah tomorrow morning to procure some specialized equipment for my business. I could transport you both to the main bus station there. You'll find significantly more travel options departing from Savannah than from Waycross. Hope, that dangerous, unfamiliar emotion, fluttered tentatively within my chest again. We possess very little money, I admitted quietly, ashamed of our destitution. We will assist with your bus fares, Mrs. Carpenter stated firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. It is simply the Christian imperative. Sharon disappeared momentarily, returning with a small, intricately carved wooden box. My accumulated tip money from working at my aunt's diner up north last summer, she explained, pressing several folded bills into my palm. Please take it. You require it far more than I do. I desperately wanted to refuse, to maintain some shred of pride, but recognized the foolishness of such a gesture. Instead, I murmured a choked thank you, the words feeling utterly inadequate to convey the magnitude of the lifeline they were extending. The Carpenters insisted we remain with them overnight. Mrs. Carpenter prepared the sofa bed in their cozy living room for Mama, while Sharon generously shared her own bedroom with me. Sleep remained elusive, every creak of the unfamiliar cabin settling, every nocturnal call of a distant night bird, every rustle in the surrounding woods sent my heart racing, convinced it signaled Daddy's imminent arrival, his vengeful pursuit. Dawn finally broke, painting the swamp sky with delicate hues of pink and gold, the air filled with the vibrant symphony of awakening bird life and buzzing insects, nature proceeding with its usual indifference, as if the previous night's horrors hadn't transpired, as if our lives hadn't been irrevocably altered. Mr. Carpenter efficiently loaded our 2 meager bags into the back of his sturdy pickup truck, while Mrs. Carpenter pressed a paper sack filled with homemade sandwiches and fruit into my hands. Sustenance for your long journey, she explained with a gentle, encouraging smile. Sharon embraced me tightly before Mama and I climbed into the truck cab. Write to me, she urged, discreetly slipping another piece of paper containing her mailing address into my pocket. Promise you'll let me know you've arrived safely. Mama remained profoundly silent as we drove away from the Carpenter's sanctuary, her gaze fixed intently on the familiar swamp landscape gliding past the truck window. I couldn't ascertain if she was bidding a silent farewell to the only home she had known for nearly 3 decades, or if her eyes scanned the dense tree line, the dark water channels, searching anxiously for any sign of Daddy's vengeful pursuit. Are we truly doing the right thing, Cordelia? She asked finally, her voice barely audible above the steady rumble of the truck's engine. I reached across the seat, taking her small, fragile hand in mine. For so many years, she had served as my shield, my protector, absorbing the brunt of Daddy's rage. Now, our roles felt irrevocably reversed. Yes, Mama, I affirmed, infusing my voice with a conviction I didn't entirely possess internally. Yes, we are finally definitively doing the right thing. The drive to Savannah stretched for nearly 3 hours, winding through sleepy small towns, traversing long stretches of dense pine forests that gradually yielded to the flat, marshy landscape of the coastal plain. Mama dozed fitfully beside me, sheer exhaustion momentarily overriding her pervasive anxiety. Mr. Carpenter maintained a low volume on the truck radio. News reports detailing escalating tensions in Vietnam, discussions concerning the recent Apollo moon landing. Popular music vastly different from the crackling static and country tunes emitted by our old radio back home. The Savannah bus terminal presented a stark contrast to the swamp's quiet isolation, a chaotic hub teeming with activity. Soldiers in crisp uniforms, families burdened with luggage and restless children, businessmen clutching briefcases, all moving with purpose through the noisy concourse. Mr. Carpenter efficiently assisted us in purchasing tickets for the northbound Greyhound, scheduled to depart at noon. Baltimore, Maryland, our destination felt impossibly distant, requiring nearly 15 hours of travel time, including scheduled transfers in Charleston and Richmond. Are you ladies certain you'll manage all right? He inquired kindly as the boarding announcement echoed through the terminal, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. We will manage, I assured him, projecting a confidence I desperately wished I felt. The prospect of navigating this lengthy, unfamiliar journey felt almost as daunting, in its own way, as confronting Daddy had. "Thank you again, Mr. Carpenter, for everything." He nodded, pressing an additional $20 bill discreetly into my hand before wishing us well and departing. Mama clung tightly to my arm as we navigated the crowded aisle and found 2 seats near the middle of the large bus, her eyes wide with apprehension as she absorbed the unfamiliar faces, the diverse humanity surrounding us. I have never ventured this far from home before," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Me neither, Mama," I admitted quietly. "But crucially, we are together now." As the powerful bus engine roared to life, pulling away smoothly from the station curb, I caught a fleeting glimpse of our reflection mirrored in the tinted window glass. 2 women, faces pale and drawn, identical hollow-eyed expressions betraying profound exhaustion and underlying fear, shoulders tensed as if bracing for an anticipated blow that hopefully was no longer imminent. It would require significant time, I recognized instinctively, for us to unlearn the deeply ingrained habits of fear, to cease flinching at sudden movements or loud noises, to gradually internalize the nascent possibility of genuine safety. The wide highway stretched before us, a ribbon of asphalt leading us away from the suffocating embrace of the swamp, away from Daddy's destructive orbit, away from the only life, the only reality we had ever known. I harbored no illusions regarding the difficulties ahead. We were essentially 2 uneducated, unskilled women from the rural backwoods, possessing little more than a handful of dollars and the clothes we wore. Yet, for the first time in my 27 years, we were unequivocally free. And that nascent freedom, however terrifying, felt like everything. Baltimore in late 1969 felt like landing on a different celestial body compared to the insular, unchanging world of the Okefenokee swamp. The sheer volume of noise, roaring traffic, blaring sirens, a constant cacophony of human voices, the overwhelming crowds thronging the sidewalks, the immense brick and concrete buildings soaring towards the sky, all conspired to induce a state of sensory overload. Mama found the transition particularly jarring. She remained sequestered within the confines of our small room at the women's shelter for the initial 3 days, seemingly paralyzed by the unfamiliar urban environment. Sharon's sister, Judith, a kind but pragmatic woman, had met our bus as arranged, guiding us through the bewildering city streets to the shelter, a large, converted brownstone situated in what she termed a transitional neighborhood. "It isn't luxurious," she had apologized candidly, showing us to a sparsely furnished room containing 2 narrow twin beds and requiring use of a communal bathroom down the hall. "But most importantly, it is safe here. No men are permitted beyond the front reception desk." Those simple words, "it is safe here," echoed persistently in my thoughts during those first disorienting weeks. Safety had remained such an alien concept for the majority of my life that I found myself perpetually anticipating its revocation, constantly scanning crowds, convinced Daddy would somehow materialize, track us down, and forcibly drag us back to the horrors of Georgia. Every unexpected opening of the shelter's heavy front door sent my heart hammering against my ribs, triggering a surge of adrenaline until I could visually confirm the visitor wasn't him. Mama's adjustment proved significantly more challenging. Decades of relentless physical and psychological abuse had inflicted wounds far deeper, far more insidious than the visible scars marking her body. She startled violently at loud noises, habitually kept her gaze downcast when addressed by strangers, and endured fitful, tormented sleep frequently interrupted by muffled cries. Even the simplest decisions, choosing what to eat from the communal kitchen, selecting clothes to wear, deciding whether to venture outside into the small courtyard for fresh air, seemed to overwhelm her, inducing a state of paralyzing indecision. Deprived of Daddy's constant directives dictating her every action, she appeared utterly adrift, lost within a newfound freedom she lacked the tools or resilience to navigate. Some women endure such prolonged control that experiencing independence initially feels akin to drowning, explained Dorothy, the shelter's resident counselor, a woman whose stern countenance belied eyes filled with deep empathy, during one of the mandatory group sessions held 3 times weekly. Your mother's sense of self was systematically dismantled over many years. She requires time and support to rediscover her own identity, separate from your father's oppressive shadow. I attended those group sessions faithfully, sitting within a circle of women whose harrowing narratives tragically mirrored aspects of our own. There was Marlene, whose husband routinely enforced discipline with his leather belt whenever dinner failed to meet his exacting standards. Yvonne, whose jealous boyfriend had violently broken her arm merely for exchanging polite words with a male neighbor. Teresa, who had fled her home in the dead of night with 3 small children after her husband, in a drunken rage, threatened them all with his service revolver. Diverse circumstances, varied backgrounds, yet all shared the same haunted expressions, the same involuntary flinching at sudden movements, the same nocturnal terrors that plagued their sleep. For the first time, the profound realization struck me. The horrors endured within our isolated cabin were not unique aberrations. They represented a pervasive, destructive pattern repeating itself within countless homes across the country, concealed behind closed doors, perpetuated by societal norms and enforced silence. Initially, contributing my own story during these sessions felt impossible. The swamp had ingrained in me the instinct to hoard secrets, to bury pain deep within, inaccessible to external scrutiny. But gradually, witnessing the extraordinary courage displayed by these other women as they shared their traumatic experiences, something within me began to loosen, to yield. On a dreary, rain-swept Tuesday in November, I finally found my voice. I genuinely believed it was normal, I admitted tentatively, my voice barely audible above the drumming rain against the window panes. Until I reached about 8 years old, I assumed all fathers routinely beat their wives, their children. I thought all mothers concealed bruises beneath their clothing as a matter of course. I believed all families existed under a constant, suffocating blanket of fear. The tears commenced then, not gentle weeping, but great, racking sobs, erupting from a place deep within, releasing years of dammed-up grief, terror, and confusion. Instantly, the other women moved closer, surrounding me, their hands resting gently on my shoulders, my back, my arms, comforting, supportive touches, profoundly different from the violent blows I'd spent a lifetime instinctively flinching away from. That emotional catharsis marked a significant turning point, the true beginning of my conscious healing journey. Though the path forward remained arduous, Judith proved an invaluable ally, assisting both Mama and me in securing employment. Mama found work cleaning guest rooms at a large downtown hotel, while I landed a position waiting tables at a bustling diner near the city's harbor. The labor was physically demanding, the wages minimal, yet by Christmas of 1969, we had managed to save enough for the deposit on a tiny, sparsely furnished 1-bedroom apartment in a slightly better neighborhood. Our small apartment became Mama's sanctuary, a space she claimed as unequivocally hers. She poured her inherent homemaking talents into transforming it, stitching simple curtains from discounted fabric remnants, diligently scrubbing the worn linoleum flooring, until it gleamed, arranging scavenged wildflowers in repurposed jelly jars placed carefully on our second-hand kitchen table. For the first time in decades, she could create and inhabit a space truly reflective of her own preferences, free from the constant threat of Daddy's arbitrary criticism or destructive rage. I, conversely, felt increasingly drawn towards a vibrant, complex world outside our small apartment walls. Baltimore in the early 1970s pulsed with the energy of social change. I discovered women's liberation meetings convened in church basements, overheard passionate civil rights discussions unfolding in neighborhood coffee shops, witnessed fervent anti-war protests marching through the city streets. I began devouring daily newspapers, tuning into progressive radio programs, gradually developing a broader understanding of the societal forces: poverty, isolation, patriarchal norms, untreated PTSD from war, that had contributed to the toxic environment within our swamp cabin. Your father wasn't simply an inherently violent individual, Cordelia, Dorothy elucidated during one of our private counseling sessions. His behavior was significantly shaped by a societal structure that historically granted men ownership over their wives and children, that equated masculinity with dominance and control, that often normalized resolving conflict through physical force rather than communication. She paused, ensuring I understood the distinction. Recognizing these external factors doesn't excuse his horrific actions, but it can help contextualize them. This perspective felt revolutionary. I had spent my entire life perceiving Daddy solely as a monstrous anomaly, unique in his cruelty. Understanding his behavior as partially symptomatic of larger, deeply ingrained societal patterns helped reframe our suffering. It wasn't a personal failing on our part. It had never been our fault. In the spring of 1971, empowered by this burgeoning understanding and a growing desire for self-improvement, I enrolled in evening classes at the local community college. The shelter had established a small scholarship fund specifically for survivors pursuing further education, and Judith guided me through the application process. My rural Georgia high school education proved woefully inadequate in some areas, revealing significant gaps in my knowledge. But I approached my studies with a fierce determination, fueled by the conviction that education represented my most viable pathway towards a fundamentally different future. I studied diligently during breaks at the diner, late into the night after Mama had fallen asleep. Mama observed my academic pursuits with a mixture of maternal pride and quiet bewilderment. I never even conceived of attending college, she confessed one evening, watching me pore over textbooks at our small kitchen table. Back in my day, girls were simply expected to marry young. That was presented as the only desirable future. Times are evolving, Mama, I told her gently, reaching across the table to take her hand. Women possess more options now, can aspire to more. A faint, wistful smile touched her lips. I'm truly glad you have these opportunities, child. I believe I am too set in my ways, too old to change so profoundly now. Yet, she was changing, albeit in her own quiet, incremental fashion. She joined a nearby church, gradually finding fellowship and community amongst the congregation's older women. She rediscovered her love for handcrafts, taking up knitting, creating warm scarves and cozy blankets, which she regularly donated back to the women's shelter that had provided our initial refuge. These were small, tentative steps towards reclaiming a sense of self, an identity existing independently of my father's suffocating control. The journey wasn't without significant setbacks. There were nights the terrifying nightmares returned with debilitating intensity, leaving both of us shaken, unable to sleep. Days when encountering a man's raised voice in a public space, a frustrated driver, an argument on the street, could trigger a full-blown panic attack in Mama, sending her retreating back into silence and fear. Moments when I caught myself reflexively reverting to the hyper-vigilant defensive habits ingrained during our years in the swamp. Healing, I learned, rarely follows a linear trajectory. It often spirals, revisiting old wounds unexpectedly before progressing forward once more. In the summer of 1972, a letter arrived, forwarded from the shelter's administrative office. My hands trembled uncontrollably as I recognized Sharon Carpenter's distinctive handwriting on the envelope. Inside, the news delivered stopped my heart momentarily. Daddy had passed away earlier that spring. His empty fishing boat had been discovered adrift deep within the swamp. The official assumption by local authorities was accidental drowning, likely precipitated by intoxication. His body had been recovered from the dark waters 3 days later. I read the letter aloud to Mama, carefully observing her reaction. She slowly crossed herself, murmured a brief, quiet prayer, then rose and proceeded to make a pot of tea with the same methodical calm she applied to any ordinary daily task. Later that evening, however, I found her standing alone on our small apartment balcony, gazing silently at the sliver of crescent moon visible between the imposing city buildings. I imagined I would feel something more significant, she confessed quietly, her voice barely audible above the distant city hum. Relief, perhaps? Even residual grief? But honestly, Cordelia, I just feel empty, numb. That's perfectly all right, Mama, I assured her, gently wrapping an arm around her thin shoulders. You don't owe him any specific emotion, any prescribed response. She nodded slowly, leaning her head against my shoulder. We are truly, finally free now, aren't we? We were. The constant, low-level background hum of fear, the apprehension that he might somehow reappear, track us down, materialize unexpectedly on a street corner, finally evaporated, lifting yet another immense weight from our shoulders. 2 months following the news of Daddy's death, I met Daniel. Our encounter occurred, fittingly perhaps, in the quiet sanctuary of the public library, where I had established a routine of studying between my college classes and shifts at the diner. He was a graduate student, researching, improbably enough, wetland ecosystems. When I casually mentioned my upbringing in the Okefenokee swamp, his face immediately illuminated with genuine intellectual curiosity. That's absolutely incredible, he exclaimed. I've only encountered descriptions in academic journals. What was it truly like, living immersed in that environment? For the first time, I found myself capable of articulating the profound, unique beauty of my homeland, separating it consciously from the trauma that had transpired there. I described the prehistoric majesty of alligators sunning themselves languidly on cypress logs, the mesmerizing symphony of frogs and insects erupting at dusk, the way the gnarled cypress knees emerged from the black water, like the ancient fingers of submerged giants. I spoke of the vibrant wildflowers carpeting the hidden hammocks during springtime, the savory taste of freshly caught catfish fried golden brown, the magical flickering dance of fireflies illuminating humid summer evenings. You speak of it with the soul of a poet, he observed quietly when I finally paused, his eyes reflecting warm admiration rather than the pity I had grown accustomed to detecting when fragments of my past inadvertently surfaced. Our courtship unfolded slowly, cautiously, mirroring my own deliberate pace. Scarred by past experiences, I remained inherently watchful, vigilant for potential red flags. Any subtle indication that this kind, gentle man, who brought me wildflowers and listened intently to my opinions, might harbor hidden darkness. Daniel seemed to possess an intuitive understanding of my underlying wariness, never pressuring me, never demanding more intimacy than I was prepared to offer, always respectfully asking permission before reaching for my hand or placing a tentative arm around my shoulders. I waited nearly 6 months before introducing him to Mama. She remained polite but noticeably reserved during their initial meetings, studying him with the careful, appraising gaze of a woman who had learned through bitter experience that charming facades could conceal monstrous realities. It required almost a full year before her inherent guardedness truly softened, before she ceased tensing instinctively whenever he entered the room. On a crisp, clear October day in 1974, Daniel and I exchanged vows in a small, simple ceremony held at Mama's beloved church. As I stood at the altar, wearing a modest white dress I had sewn myself, I caught sight of Mama seated in the front pew, tears streaming freely down her cheeks, not tears of sorrow or fear this time, but tears of pure, unadulterated joy. Beside her sat Dorothy, my steadfast counselor from the shelter, Judith and Sharon, whose initial act of kindness had facilitated our escape, and several other women from my support group who had become cherished friends, a chosen family forged in shared understanding and mutual support, bonds stronger perhaps than those merely defined by blood. Our honeymoon was spent nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, residing in a cozy rented cabin deliberately chosen for its proximity to neighbors and reliable telephone service. Concessions Daniel readily made, understanding my lingering anxieties regarding isolated settings. His profound patience as we navigated the complexities of physical intimacy, my involuntary flinches at sudden movements, the occasional surge of panic when feeling physically restrained, demonstrated a depth of empathy and compassion I once wouldn't have believed possible in any man. Love isn't intended to inflict pain, Cordelia, he murmured gently one night as we lay quietly together, his fingers softly tracing the faint, faded scar on my shoulder, a permanent souvenir from one of Daddy's belt buckles. You deserve unwavering gentleness. We all inherently do. In 1976, our daughter Rose arrived, named in honor of my mother, who held her first grandchild with trembling hands, her face utterly transformed by awe and wonder. Observing Mama interact with baby Rose, I witnessed fleeting glimpses of the woman she might have become had decades of abuse not stolen her spirit. Playful, instinctively tender, her laughter echoing more freely, more genuinely than I could ever recall. Motherhood itself presented unique challenges, occasionally triggering dormant fears I thought I had successfully overcome. What if the propensity for violence resided latently within my own bloodline? What if, despite my best intentions, I proved incapable of definitively breaking the destructive cycle? The first time toddler Rose erupted into an inconsolable tantrum, her small body rigid with frustration, screaming relentlessly while I attempted every known soothing technique, I felt a terrifying flash of intense frustration myself. Shaken, I instinctively stepped away, retreating to our back steps, hands trembling, forcing myself to take deep, calming breaths. Daniel discovered me there moments later, his expression conveying quiet understanding, not judgment. He simply sat beside me, taking my hand wordlessly. "You are not him, Cordelia," he stated firmly after a moment. "You never will be. Remember, you consciously chose to walk away. You deliberately forged a different path." Those words became my internal mantra throughout the subsequent years as we raised Rose and, later, our son, Thomas, born in 1979. I made thousands of conscious, deliberate choices every single day, parenting with intentional patience and expressed tenderness, readily apologizing for my own mistakes and imperfections, actively demonstrating to our children that love could indeed be steadfast, unconditional, and fundamentally safe. We fostered an environment of open communication within our household, encouraged questions, validated feelings, and absolutely, unequivocally, never raised a hand in anger. When Rose turned 7, her curiosity led her to inquire about the old photograph displayed on our living room mantel. A snapshot taken shortly after Mama and I first arrived in Baltimore, our faces appearing thin, haunted, eyes wary. "Why do you and Grandma look so sad in that picture, Mommy?" she asked with childhood innocence. Daniel and I had previously discussed how we would approach explaining my past to our children when the time felt appropriate, not burdening them with graphic details, but conveying sufficient truth for them to comprehend the profound importance of respect, empathy, and gentleness within relationships. "Grandma and I had to leave our previous home because it wasn't a safe place for us," I explained carefully, pulling her onto my lap. "Sometimes people who are supposed to love each other don't know how to express that love properly. Sometimes they end up hurting each other instead." Her small face scrunched in concentration. Like hitting?" "Yes, sweetheart," I acknowledged softly. "Sometimes like that. But we came here, to Baltimore, to start fresh, to build a new life surrounded by people who understand how to love kindly. Like your daddy, and like you." She considered this solemnly for a moment before declaring with simple conviction, "I'm glad you're safe now, Mommy." Those innocent words, echoing Judith's assurance from our first night at the shelter years ago, brought unexpected tears stinging to my eyes. "Me too, sweetheart," I whispered, hugging her close. "Me too." Mama resided with us, a cherished member of our household, until her peaceful passing in 1992. She lived long enough to witness her grandchildren blossom into teenagers, young adults who knew her only as the gentle, loving woman who taught them treasured family recipes, patiently identified bird calls during walks in the park, and occasionally shared carefully edited stories about growing up in the mysterious Okefenokee swamp, omitting always the darker, traumatic chapters of her life there. At her funeral, delivering the eulogy, I spoke not of her suffering, but of her profound resilience, her quiet strength, her enduring capacity for joy, despite the immense hardships that had sought to extinguish her spirit. "My mother," I told the assembled mourners, my voice thick with emotion, possessed a strength far greater than anyone, including perhaps herself, ever fully realized. Now rocking gently on my porch swing in my own advanced years, observing my own grandchildren chasing fireflies in the twilight shadows of the yard. A yard belonging to the home Daniel and I have shared for over 4 decades. I find myself marveling at the immense distance traveled from that terrified young woman who fled the suffocating darkness of the swamp, armed with little more than a small canvas bag and a desperate. The journey has certainly not been without its recurring challenges. There remain nights when the old nightmares resurface, vivid and terrifying. Days when an unexpected sound, a specific scent, a fleeting expression on a stranger's face can momentarily catapult me back to that chaotic kitchen in rural Georgia. Trauma, I've learned, leaves indelible echoes, phantom limbs of pain that never entirely disappear. But those echoes have grown significantly fainter over time, muted by decades of love, stability, and the conscious, deliberate work of healing. I have come to understand that breaking destructive cycles isn't accomplished through a single, heroic act of courage, but rather through thousands upon thousands of small, intentional choices enacted daily, choosing vulnerability when ingrained fear screams for protective walls, choosing trust when past experience counsels pervasive suspicion, choosing deliberate gentleness when reflexive anger surges. It requires actively rejecting the insidious notion that suffering is somehow inevitable, fated, or deserved. It demands nurturing the core belief that one is inherently worthy of peace, deserving of joy, entitled to experience tender touches that never escalate into violent blows. If my long, often arduous story imparts any single lesson, let it be this: it is never too late to begin anew. Regardless of the depth of the wounds inflicted upon you, irrespective of how thoroughly your voice has been silenced, no matter how completely you have been isolated by circumstance or design, a path forward always exists. There are hands reaching out, resources available, communities waiting to help you take those first terrifying, yet ultimately liberating, steps towards freedom and healing. You are not defined by the abuses perpetrated against you. You are defined by your intrinsic courage, your innate resilience, your remarkable capacity to heal, to love, and to reclaim your own narrative. That is the profound truth I desperately wish someone could have imparted to the frightened hidden girl beneath the floorboards all those decades ago. That is the truth I have spent an entire lifetime painstakingly proving, not just to the world, but more importantly, to myself. And now, at 83, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in familiar, comforting hues, content in a life rebuilt from the very ashes of destruction, I can finally declare with unwavering certainty, the arduous journey was worth every single difficult, transformative step.